Welcome to the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Together we explore the vast landscapes of life, delving into the rich soil of experiences, sowing the seeds of curiosity, and harvesting the profound wisdom that each episode unfolds. Welcome to another podcast of Harvesting Wisdom. I'm your host, Mike McMahon, and my co-host today here in the Gobi Desert of Mongolia is Ms. Guzman, Diana Guzman.
Thank you.
A journalist, and you had heard or read about this. This is the Billion Tree initiative. I haven't really read anything about it at all, so I claim ignorance. But what is the? Do you know who the backers of this are? And tell us a little story about that.
Yeah, sure. So the Billion Tree Initiative was started by President of Mongolia a few years ago, and the backers generally are the Mongolian government and the Forestry Service, but also foreign governments are helping as well. So, for example, this plot that we're in right now, it got assistance from the South Korean government. And the idea behind it is that they want to help fight desertification, or the process of land becoming desert, through planting trees. And it's called Billion Tree Initiative because they've pledged to plant 1 billion trees by, I believe it's 2050, but I need to fact check myself on that.
So there's not 1 billion here, but there's a boatload of trees just in this one grouping. I think we passed other groupings on the way. So these started most likely as seedlings rather than seed. It's easier to propagate. I do a process back in Arizona called Pell Pots, and what you're doing is growing the roots 18 to 20 to 30 inches, 36 inches. And primarily what I work on is native trees. You can put any tree in there, but the idea is once you've established the roots for, say, 6 months or whatever the growing period is, the following season, when the tree is more likely to grow, you put them in the ground, and then you just temporarily water them or drip them. So we see here that there is drip line in here. Where the original source of water is, I don't know how they're doing that, what the cost of water, that kind of thing. But the idea of this, we call it revegetation if it's native. So if these are endemic species or native species, they've co-evolved with this soil and with the biology, and not just the entire ecosystem, whatever insects, whatever is in that soil already, which probably has gone dormant if it's desertified, will now come back to life. And really all it takes is some water to establish, and then photosynthesis as these trees grow. We can see that there's many varieties. We've identified a half dozen of them. I don't know if these are native or not. If they're not native, they serve very little purpose other than to use water. They're not going to work with any of the pollinators or any of the biology in the soil so much, but we see that they're planting them 10 foot on center. So a lot of these are more desert shrubs than trees, which is fine because that's more of the native plant material here. So I don't know how far along they've come on it. I see greenhouses way up there. So for all we know, they are growing seedlings nearby. They're planting, putting drip in. Technically, you would drip during the hot growing months, which would be the summer, and then you can drip once a month or once a quarter, or not at all over the winter, depending on your climate and your rains. But generally, once they establish and they get to be this size, that's promising. It doesn't. There looks some are torched, and we see some missing holes, but it looks like they're having a fairly good success rate. Using a process like this, you want at least 90% success. But with tall pots, because they're so inexpensive, as little as 60 or 70% is still worth the effort. And I'm assuming this is an area that was either grazed or overgrazed, or it's been graded, but for some kind of purpose. If you look on the other side of the fence, Joe, you can see there's nothing over there, just some native grasses. So that's somewhat died out. There's still plants there, but obviously not as robust. I don't know the rationale for planting in a row like this and planting at this density, but they may have some rationale for windbreak or to do section. But there's a lot of open land in Mongolia. So if, your point is to try to resuscitate the soil and the biology, this density would be pretty cost prohibitive. But, perhaps they're just doing it in and around the urban area that they've that has been scarred. Have you read much more about the project?
Yeah. I think that you bring up some really interesting controversies with it. So far, the project has been planting mostly in or near urban areas, which does serve other purposes, like you said, windbreaks. And so in that case, it could be beneficial. But I think the rhetoric around it is really this idea of we're holding back the desert, we're fighting climate change. And I think that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because there really isn't from the scientists that I've talked to, there really isn't a rationale for planting areas that are desert and that should be desert. Like you said, if they were, like this, and then something happened and they got degraded, then it kind of makes sense to try to restore it. But this idea that we're going to turn desert areas into kind of wooded areas is really not kind of in line with ecology. So I've heard some criticism from researchers that I've talked to who study the Gobi Desert and who say, like, this plan is kind of going against that natural ecology. And also the question of resources. So is this the best use of water, scarce water? And then what are the causes of desertification? If it's because of overgrazing, then maybe something needs to be done to try to do more rotational grazing or to reduce livestock herds. But if it's more about climate change, then, that's something that we need to be fighting climate change on, like, a global scale.
Sure. So, yeah, you brought up a good point. What is more important, trees or grassland? Pretty much grassland wins that battle. We don't hear about trying to save grasslands or steppe.
It's not as sexy.
As it may, because it seems to be harder, and it probably is a little bit harder, but there's nothing wrong with doing trees if they're endemic and they're native, and if you're repairing some scarred areas. The cool thing about this is that after they get established pretty much to the point where they are now, you can pull the drip. And if you have a percentage that die over the next 20, 30 years, it's okay. But you are kind of revegetating an area. So if this was a scarred area, you're going to get a little more overstory with the tree, and that's going to allow the understory grasses to come back. So you can kind of recreate a system here that works. But sometimes you're not paying attention to the way it was originally, because a lot of trees will grow in wash or riparian areas, streams, and that has a purpose, because even though you could have drought for a long, long period of time, those trees, the biology, all of it stays alive, goes a little dormant. But then when you do get these big rains, which they get, that's part of climate change, is to get large quantities of rain at weird times. But when you have it in a lower recessed area, it helps retain some of that water. So that may have been something worth contemplating too. But, I haven't really studied this ecosystem so well. When you're talking, this was probably not agriculture, I don't know. If the idea of that city spreading comes back here and they knock the trees down anyway
Right.
because they need the space, that's a different story too. So it really depends on what their intentions are, and we'll probably do a little more reading. And I think you tried to reach out
I
to
did,
see if they
yeah.
wanted to podcast with
And
us.
they did not respond. So,
That's, a lot of NGOs are strapped that way. So
well, this was actually the forest ministry that's in charge of this. So,
Okay.
yeah.
the government does take a while to get back to you,
Yeah.
but we'll see. We'll see what they do. Yeah,
Yeah.
my question would be, what are they doing with some of the pasture land?
Yeah.
Growing a variety of grasses, so you're not monoculturing. But it really has to do with your animal husbandry. Are you moving? If you're overgrazing an area, it just doesn't have the ability to come back. The advantage of moving animals through is that when they, defecate, when they poop, you have instant biology. But if you're doing it in an area that's already been scorched, those cow patties don't serve much purpose unless somehow they're raked into the soil. They'll just dry on top, and they're not really providing the
Yeah.
nutrient or the biology that you'd want to see. So it is a bit of a process, and it is I think they're aware of what they're doing. Population here in Mongolia is not super high, and the amount of land is vast, and they have different biomes and different seasons here. So it seems like this would be a perfect test pilot place to actually reverse some of these processes that shouldn't be, unless they're exporting some of their beef or some of their crops that they're growing on. You should be able to, this should be an easier process to revegetate than places that have a tremendous pressure of population on the food system. So that's, I guess, what little we know. You've done more research on this project, not tons, and you haven't been able to talk to anybody, but what were the parameters, or what's your understanding of what they've done?
Yeah. So this area that we're in now, it's kind of a very early initiative of this tree planting idea. So this plot was planted in 2010, starting in 2010, with help from the Korean government and the government of Mongolia. And their goal here is to plant trees to combat this process of desertification, or the process of the land becoming desert.
And what are their goals?
So their goals now are to plant 1 billion trees across the whole country by 2030. And that initiative, called the Billion Trees Initiative, was announced in 2021 by the president of Mongolia. And they're so far pretty well into this project. They've planted 84 million trees as of October of last year. I think the question is, how many of those trees have survived long term? We don't really have research on that.
It looks, well, it's the same thing when we do salvage work in the desert. There's an ordinance that requires us to dig them. Some cities don't require in that ordinance a survival rate. Some do. Scottsdale requires 90%. But again, what I see is you've got a good metric, a good goal. It's billion trees. It's a solid number. But to me, it's what you're ultimately trying to do.
Yeah.
If this is combating climate change, how is it doing it? And then why aren't we seeing more of what I would consider a natural environment or ecosystem that's working right here? This right here in a windrow is more monoculture, which is how we kind of got in this mess to begin with. The other thing is wherever we've gone in the Gobi, just like everywhere in the world, when I was in the Galapagos and I was diving, I picked up plastic. We're 600 miles from Ecuador. Right here, we're seeing garbage in here. For the most part, the field is pretty clean, but it's a pet peeve I have too when my guys are working construction projects or even maintenance projects, and they leave plastic water bottles. I've forbidden water bottles. I don't know how well that's enforced, but You want to do less damage than good at a minimum. So it'll be interesting to see how they're doing it. I understand the concept. It's so much easier to run one long drip tape,
Yeah.
valve them separate, be able to water them, and get them going. That's why monoculture works, and that's why windrowing works. But the issue with that is that it's you've got a density of trees that really is not replicating any kind of natural original environment. So anyway, we've had this conversation. We know that this part of the world, every country and every people need energy, and you can't deny people energy because you're denying them a right to life, right? So it's really hard for a country like the United States, which has a very small population, as a percentage of our total population on the planet, yet we're using a third of the Earth's resources. So it's not really politically correct to be able to tell other people how they should perform, and we know we need energy. So energy is a problem worldwide. How we need probably to almost double our energy, 40, 50% at least more energy to have people survive. Temporary fixes, and they are temporary, are coal and fossil fuels such as gas. They're rich in this area, so denying them is not necessarily a good thing. There's ways of controlling coal with expensive filters, but coal is more of an air pollution problem, and it has an effect somewhat regionally, but it's really a worldwide effect because once it gets up, the CO2 gets up in the atmosphere. That atmosphere is revolving around the planet every day. So does coal cause desertification? I don't see how that would be the case, other than it's using a tremendous amount of water. We're in a desert, just like in Arizona. The aquifers were in the Carboniferous. I can't get any words. So that was, a few 100 million years ago, maybe, or I don't even know. I'd have to check. But that's a period in time where there was a tremendous amount of stored carbon under pressure, and now we're digging it up for energy, which is, it's just a natural thing that humans do, but it's a limited resource. At some point, everyone knows that it's not going to go on and on forever. So there's technological solutions, but part of the solution really has to do with our practices, right? So we talked about coal and mining as a pressure, and then we talked about, again, the increased amount of animal husbandry, and then the effects going from a socialist state to to more of a democracy or a capitalistic, materialistic country. We've seen some of those effects. So what are your observations? We've met different people. We've seen different things. What are you taking from this?
Yeah, well, I think that, I really like what you said about how we cannot be imposing certain criteria upon countries. At the same time, I also do feel that, as you said, the U.S. consumes the most, and we're responsible somehow for trying to make a change or trying to maybe help countries get to this point where they don't have to rely on coal, and I really don't think that we as the United States are doing enough to do that, especially right now
Sure.
under this administration. And yeah, I think that really is clear here because we're very much, this is not our traditional sphere where there's a lot of American influence.
Sure.
And then I think with the trees, it's interesting to think about solutions because, you talked about all these pressures like grazing and mining, but it seems to me, based subjectively on what I've seen so far, that the government's response to that is mainly just this project of we're going to plant trees, which seems a little bit like it might be not addressing those root causes. So I also am looking forward to continuing to do more research on that and talking to more people. I want to talk to representatives from the forest ministry and from people who do this and ask them, to explain like how this is addressing those problems. But from the people I've talked to so far, they have seemed to say that this isn't really like a solution.
It's a great idea that they want to take action.
Yeah.
But one of the things we've done in Scottsdale, Phoenix, and even some degree in Mesa is we'll go out and inventory a piece of desert first. Some of our projects are 600 acres, some are 10,000 acres, and we'll do an inventory by species, by acre. So the question is was this palette of material ever existing in a natural environment?
Right.
I would say it's very unlikely that they had windrows 10 feet on center.
Yeah.
If you probably went out, if there's any natural areas left, you might see this particular density, but usually it's a density of one type of tree or another or a shrub. And so coming back into an ecosystem like this, you're better off planting back in those original densities or take into account a loss ratio, whatever you think that might be. And then, again, a temporary drip system like this works. You can certainly enhance the soil using different compost blends. Might be expensive. It's expensive to put them on now, but not so expensive to put them in a backfill mix. So whether or not they're candidates, we generally don't, when we're planting natives, we use native soil. We don't do a lot of amendments, but technically you could put in a small percentage backfill with a mycorrhizae, or if you wanted to try to retain moisture, maybe with a biochar or zeolite or something, or if this is really low on humic acid or whatever it may be, you can modify that mix, use a small amount when you're planting. But that would be my take. This is a little bit of an artificial environment that they put them back in. So we'll see what they come up with. And, no project is without critics and fault. And, it's just different things to think of when you're replanting and how you're doing things. And again, what was the nature of this soil before and what plants were here before? Hard to tell. But I'm sure the forestry department has a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
So it's food for thought.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining the Harvesting Wisdom podcast. Click subscribe and like for ongoing insightful conversations. Explore our webpage for show notes and additional resources. Visit our guests' webpage for deeper insights. Your engagement is the foundation of our journey, and until next time, keep pursuing wisdom.